Hi, I'm Deb Falzoi,
And I'm Vicki Courtemanche.
and we're the founders of End Workplace Abuse and authors of the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, taking on workplace bullying and mobbing.
The Workplace Psychological Safety Act aims to hold employers and abusers accountable for psychological abuse that violates an employee's inherent basic human right to psychological safety.
We're talking about behaviors like withholding vital workplace resources, false accusations, sabotage to job performance, harassing and excessive emails, and repeated verbal abuse that employees, typically bosses, use to control the narrative to minimize or eliminate a perceived threat, often a high performer.
In healthy, safe work environments, HR and higher-ups address these situations through neutral, thorough investigations and have consequences for the abusers.
But in toxic work environments, HR and higher ups lead employees to believe they have a legitimate complaint process and then ignore complaints, or worse, join in with a false narrative to push out what they see as a threat of a lawsuit, caring more about their liability than their work cultures, their top performers, and their bottom lines.
We call this part mobbing, and it's the key to addressing this epidemic. There will always be toxic employees who misuse their work power, but when an employer misuses their power and leaves the target in a toxic work environment without addressing the problem, all to avoid liability, there's no way for employees to address the problem. A targeted employee's stress levels go from bad to worse.
There's significant mental and emotional injury leading to physical injury, and the victim is often left to choose between their health and a paycheck. And often they choose their health and leave.
Game over, the bully wins, their perceived competition is gone.
And the employer wins, their perceived threat of liability is gone.
Meanwhile, the unsuspecting employee who did nothing to provoke it finds themselves significantly sick and unemployed.
Think about it like domestic abuse. You have one person all about power and control, chipping away at the self-worth of others. Both targets of domestic abuse and workplace abuse are left to pick up the pieces.
Workers feel betrayed when they realize their employer was in on the abuse to avoid liability. And then worse, realize there is no legal recourse. They become shells of their former selves. Their income and careers are gone. Their self-worth is shattered. They suffer from anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts. And many are diagnosed with PTSD.
Employers basically destroy their education and work experiences and toss them down the drain.
Targeted and victimized employees have no choice but to leave the toxic workplace to save their health and find themselves relying on social services. In other words, employers pass the cost of employee well-being onto taxpayers via social services and the healthcare system.
Employees assume in this day and age that protections are in place for workers, but that's not the case. There's nothing with teeth to protect employees from this form of abuse unless it's discriminatory.
Employers' vast legal resources influenced the courts, pushing back on anti-discrimination law beginning in the 80s, shifting the focus to require proof of discriminatory intent rather than impact to maintain the status quo and the social hierarchy.
They've made it harder, not easier, for women and people of color to seek justice after a hostile work environment. Research out of MIT and leanin.org shows women and people of color are most likely to experience a toxic work environment.
Everyone needs protections, but those who need them most aren't even close to adequately protected.
And when we say everyone needs protections, we mean everyone. Studies show anywhere from 30 to nearly 70% of US workers have experienced or witnessed workplace bullying or mobbing during their careers. It's an epidemic that's 4 times more common than sexual harassment.
Which, by the way, doesn't require proof of intent or health harm to have occurred. We know proving intent is nearly impossible to do, and we don't want to have to wait for our health to suffer in order to hold employers accountable for toxic, psychologically unsafe work environments. And we know employers pay physicians to evaluate targets so they can point to anything but the workplace abuse as a cause of harm.
Workplace bullying and mobbing don't just hurt targets and taxpayers, they hurt bystanders who fear speaking up when their employers do nothing or make situations worse.
When we look at who's writing the rules to keep themselves in power, the employers, you'd think employers would be exempt from the damage.
But workplace bullying and mobbing hurt businesses too. When they experience increased turnover and decreased morale and productivity, that's not good for business, it's not good for the economy, and it's not good for society.
The Workplace Psychological Safety Act focuses on holding employers and abusers accountable for toxic work environments as deemed by a reasonable person. Employers will have regulated timeframes around investigations and liability for not adequately addressing reports of workplace bullying.
They'll also be required to report on indicators of employee well-being so we can stop treating worker mistreatment as a set of individual cases and instead focus on the systemic problem it is, where abusers and employers channel sexism, racism, ageism, ableism, and other isms through bullying acts. And employees will finally be able to seek justice for a toxic work environment, just like they can for sexual harassment when employers don't use forced arbitration and non-disclosure agreements. They can finally feel like society is on their side.
The Workplace Psychological Safety Act is about prevention. We know when other countries implemented protections around workplace bullying and mobbing, and most industrialized countries have done so, incidences of workplace bullying and mobbing have gone down.
It's time to hold employers accountable. Workers shouldn't have to choose between their health and a paycheck. Let's stop this epidemic together so workers no longer have to dread their next workday and can feel psychologically safe. Workers are the reasons employers exist. They're the backbone, and yet their backs are breaking.
Visit WPSAct.org to find out how you can help create psychologically safer workplaces so you and your loved ones can feel psychologically safe at work.